Just going down into the depths of Paris, the underground. Probably dropped at least 30 feet by now. Just keeps on going. Woo! To think I gotta come back all up and down, up these steps later. Almost a minute of going downstairs. This is fucking nuts. Don't mind my cursing if I tend to curse a lot. It's just the excitement in me. Oh, snaps. Some rough death on the wall. Getting pretty dark in here. The roof is very, very low as well. Let's see, I gotta listen to one of these audio guides.
The lit area where you'll see a stone wall surrounded by pillars. You're in what is called the workshop, an old quarry that has been laid out to show visitors the techniques used by the quarrymen before the reinforcement work. The first example on the right is a pillar cut from the rough rock. Jean-Pierre Gély.
When the underground quarries were first worked, the quarrymen left pillars of solid limestone to support the rocks above the quarry. These were called turned pillars, simply because you could turn around them. They were regularly spaced to prevent the quarry ceiling collapsing. In the 15th century, the quarrymen invented a new technique, this time extracting all the limestone without leaving anything, and supporting the quarry ceiling with pillars built by hand, with large blocks that can be seen in the gallery. What was left over after cutting was enclosed in dry stone walls, known as arcs.
These arcs et borage quarries are unique to the Paris region and use a highly advanced technique. The hand-built pillars are flexible enough to be piled up and bent, so they support the pressure of the quarry ceiling better than turned pillars, which can eventually break if the rock weakens. This quarry might seem small to you, but you have to remember that behind the arc, the limestone was worked up to a depth of dozens of meters. which have since been filled in with the leftover stone. A little further along on the right, you can see a sloping gallery below, where the old branched columns alternate with stone arches, giving the place a majestic architectural appearance.
Don't know how much of that you guys heard, but there was just a brief summary of what this area consists of. Very cool. Oh, wow. Check that out. That is crazy.
This is the Festival of the Catacombs. In a few moments, you'll be entering the 800-meter-long labyrinth of this huge ossuary. Paris copied the name Catacombs from the ancient catacombs in Rome and Naples, where the Christians buried their dead in the first few centuries AD. The Paris Catacombs were opened in the late 18th century to clean up the centre of Paris, where the overfull cemeteries were posing a growing health risk. For 13 centuries, Parisians who died in 22 of the city's parishes, and bodies from the hospital and mortuary, were buried in the Cemetery of the Innocents, near what is now the Forum des Halles. But the available space was limited. From the 16th century onwards, charnel houses were built, and the bones were removed to them from the overfilled graves so that these could be reused. The thousands of decomposing bodies piling up constantly in them encouraged the spread of disease. A late 18th century chronicler wrote,
"In this confined area, the lives and health of the inhabitants were in imminent danger of infection. Soup and milk went off in a few hours in the houses close to the cemetery. Wine turned sour when it was tapped, and the miasmas from the bodies threatened to contaminate the air."
In May 1780, a mass grave cracked and overflowed into the cellars of the neighbouring houses. After that, a parliamentary decree banned all further burials, until in 1785, Louis XVI finally decided to close down the cemetery and move it.
When the decision was taken to clear out the Cemetery of the Innocents, Guillemot, the quarry inspector in charge of the reinforcement of the underground tunnels, was asked to find an appropriate site. He decided on the old quarries on the Montsouris plain at Dombissoire outside Paris. On the 7th of April 1786, the catacombs were blessed and consecrated by the church authorities. The transfer of the bones could begin. It took 15 months in an unchanging ritual. Hearses crossed the city at nightfall, covered with a black veil, and followed by priests in surplices chanting the Office for the Dead. Each church had its own graveyard, and, like the Cemetery of the Innocents, the other cemeteries in central Paris were also cleared. It took until 1814 to move the bones. Baron Haussmann briefly resumed the process in the mid-19th century for the major redevelopment. The bones were thrown down shafts altogether, in some places piled up to a height of 30 meters, with no distinction of birth. They're estimated to be the remains of over 6 million Parisians, including important historical figures such as Rabelais, Racine, Lully, Pascal, Danton, and Robespierre, as well as Guillemot, the quarry inspector himself.
Now walk towards the entrance of the ossuary and start the next commentary. Please remember that you're not allowed to touch the bones or to take flash photographs.
stop. Here is the Empire of the Dead.
Ericard de Thury was only 33 when he took over the supervision of the quarries from Guillemot in 1809. The catacombs did not escape the upheavals of the French Revolution. They were neglected, and the bones lay jumbled together in a damp and polluted atmosphere. The young engineer started to restore them and created a unique, romantic and macabre setting for them. Sylvie Robin, Chief Curator.
Ericard de Thury a l'idée incroyable.
In 1809, Ericard de Thury had the amazing idea of transforming the ossuary, where bones had been piling up for more than 30 years, into one of the principal museums of Paris, and he created a macabre landscaped underground walk for visitors. The phrase is very important. It sets the tone because it says, "Stop, this is the Empire of Death." This is a phrase often engraved on the funerary inscriptions of antiquity, as it invites the passerby to take the time to reflect and think of the dead. And the Empire of Death is a more menacing expression. It is taken from a sermon by Bossuet, and it warns visitors that they are entering another world. This Alexandrine, a warning to the visitor, is the first in a long litany of maxims as you go along. They were chosen by Ericard de Thury himself. In his words, he wanted to
break the sinister and dark monotony of this huge ossuary by inscriptions taken from religious writings, poets, and philosophers of all eras, and bring together their most beautiful sayings on our existence, its fragility, death, and finally the hope of another life. An idea that's as sweet, as necessary, as it's comforting for those who are mourning.
Ericard de Thury also had stone plaques carved inside the ossuary, from which you can identify where the bones came from and when they were moved here. This is the only tombstone you'll see in the catacombs. It used to be on the tomb of Françoise Gélin, who died in 1821. She devoted her life to securing the release of a famous prisoner, Jean-Henri de Latude, from the Bastille. In an attempt to gain the favour of Louis XV's mistress, Madame de Pompadour, Latude arranged a fake attack on her in 1748, taking care to warn her of the danger in a letter. When the hoax was discovered, he was arrested and paid for this childish prank by being imprisoned without trial in various royal prisons for 35 years. He managed to escape several times, but was always recaptured. The rope ladder he used to escape from the Bastille on the night of the 25th to the 26th of February 1764 is now on display in the Musée Carnavalet. When the catacombs were built, a sort of museum was set up at the Tout-Missoir quarry. Tombstones, crosses, and inscriptions from the cemeteries were displayed there if the families had not asked for their return. This short-lived museum disappeared during the Revolution. Françoise Gélin's plaque is all that remains of it. To listen to the next commentary, walk along the gallery to a supporting pillar surrounded by a large pile of skulls and shin bones that makes the whole thing look like a barrel.
Quanto isso aqui? 15. Não, para encher de ossos. 15 meses. Para trazer os ossos. Então, para construir isso aqui, não sei. Isso aqui é gigante, fala. Aí, minha cabeça pega aqui se eu ficar reto.
A bizarre event took place in this crypt between midnight and 2 a.m. on the 2nd of April 1897. The participants had been sent the following invitation.
You're invited to attend the religious and secular concert by famous musicians to be held in the ossuary of the Paris Catacombs on Friday, the 2nd of April, 1897. Important notes. Entrance via number 92 Rue Darrow from 11 p.m. To make sure that curious bystanders do not block the entrance, please do not have carriages stop at the door. This is a personal invitation.
A journalist from Le Figaro, who had been invited, reported,
We found several of our colleagues who had arrived a few moments earlier sitting on simple straw-bottomed chairs. People are certainly very chatty in the catacombs. Professor Poirier, holding a superb skull, was whiling away the wait by giving the captivated guests a fascinating lecture on craniology. There were 100 people there altogether, including a few intrepid ladies.
The clandestine concert was organised by some young people who found the idea amusing. A quarry engineer they knew had promised to turn a blind eye. At midnight, a 45-piece orchestra started the candlelit concert in the midst of skulls and shin bones. The programme was specially chosen for the setting. Chopin's Funeral March, Danse Macabre by Saint-Saëns, and Beethoven's Funeral March from the Eroica Symphony. The entertainment ended around 2:30 a.m. Night carriages had even been arranged. To find out more about some of the famous people who have visited the catacombs, carry on along the gallery to the exit from the ossuary.
The catacombs have fascinated the public ever since they were first opened, but only a privileged few were allowed in at that time. In 1787, one of Louis XVI's brothers, the future Charles X, came to see them with ladies of the court. It was not until the First Empire that they were first opened to the public. Ericard de Thury himself escorted some of the curious visitors who crowded in. He had a black line drawn on the quarry ceiling to help visitors find their way. The Emperor of Austria, living in Paris as the victor, visited the catacombs in May 1814 after the defeat of Napoleon I, while the Russian regiments camped nearby were brought here by their officers. In 1860, the Emperor Napoleon III came with his son. The Prussian Prime Minister Bismarck visited during the World Fair in 1867, as did several important foreigners like Prince Oscar, the future King of Sweden. We also know that Ericard de Thury set up a mineralogy exhibition in an adjoining gallery, displaying various curious minerals and fossils found in the quarries, as well as what was called a pathological exhibition. This was a collection of abnormally sized, deformed bones, showing all the diseases that could afflict the human skeleton. Those two exhibitions were closed down at the end of the 19th century. The catacombs also inspired 19th century artists. In 1862, Félix Nadar, a leading photographer of his day, produced one of the first underground photographic reports as a record of the bones being put in place.